And suddenly after Devita's talk, Avinash has decided to buy a Sherwani instead of the new suit he was planning to buy. Moving on, the role of an entrepreneur is quite multifaceted. It's not just about raising funds, spending the money, and also making money, but also being in sync with the current economic scenario.
Our next speaker, Mr. Navneet Munot, will take us through the yesterday, today, and tomorrow of the Indian economy. In a career spanning close to 2 decades, he has been associated with Morgan Stanley Investment Management as Executive Director and Head Multi-Strategy Boutique, and Birla Sun Life Asset Management Company Limited as Chief Investment Officer, Fixed Income and Hybrid Funds. Navneet Munot sir is Chief Investment Officer currently of SBI Funds Management since 2008 and is responsible for overseeing investments across asset classes worth over $10 billion. So ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome on stage Mr. Navneet Munot.
I think the subject written on your is this innovation in mutual fund, but whatever we are doing, I think some of the other company would be doing something very similar, leveraging the power of mobile technology, how to use big data. We have lakhs of investors investing in different kinds of funds. We'll be doing something very similar, not something very different. So the last minute I was asked that people are going to listen about a lot about the technology, the big data, clean tech, whatever. But I think nobody is going to cover the operating environment in which most of the businesses are operating. So what's happening in our macroeconomy, the impact on markets. So over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to share my views on what's happening in the Indian economy, how it's going to impact the markets, and how it can impact the entrepreneurs. I just hope that that's more interesting for you. Otherwise, I can talk about what are the innovations that are happening in mutual fund. Which one you prefer? The first one, okay. So now we live in a very strange world today. As somebody mentioned that if you are rich, somebody might have heard this, that if you are rich, you get bailout. If you are poor, you get handout. But if you are somewhere in the middle, you get left out. Unfortunately, most of us are in that. So if you are really rich, I mean, if you are the, most of the top corporates or the bankers world over, you get the bailout from the governments or from some federal agencies. If you are really poor, I mean, the governments are lining up to give some kind of handouts. The problem is with people who are really in the middle. And I'll talk about the Indian economy in terms of what's really gone wrong. Most of the things that you are hearing, even 5 years back, people were as enthused about the huge potential of our positive demographics, the opportunity which is there in India's infrastructure, the opportunity which is there in whole consumption field, the opportunity in outsourcing, the opportunity in terms of the technological developments that are happening and what India can do in it. All those were same in 2008 and are actually have actually improved. So our demographics has actually improved in last 5 years, or those opportunities have actually gone up. But still the economy which was growing at 9% is growing at 4.5%, and there is an environment of gloom. What has really gone wrong with us and where we are, I mean, what is the road ahead for next couple of years? In next couple of minutes, one very simple few slides, I'll try to explain what has really gone wrong with the economy and why we think that probably the worst is behind us. Though if you listen to most of the media, most of the I would say the commentators, you still get a sense that no, that there's still a lot more wrong with our economy, with our policy paralysis, execution logjam, and so many things. But I think the worst is clearly behind us. Why we strongly believe that, and where markets are headed. Can I have the? So now there is this next slide. Murphy's law that anything that can go wrong will go wrong, and in case of India, we have really proved that. You have that? Can I? Next one. So let's say anything that should have gone up has fallen in last 5 years. Our investments, our industrial production, savings, GDP growth, rupee, they should have gone up, they have gone down. And what should have fallen? The inflation, interest rates, fiscal deficit, current account, they've all kind of gone up in last couple of years. And the genesis of all this, what has happened today, I'll just take a minute. I saw this D word, dream, discover, disrupt and dream. Actually lots of D words that really haunted the global economy, the delinquencies, the dirty world of derivatives, devaluation. That was the 2008. At that point in time, after the Lehman crisis, unfortunately, it coincided with general elections in India in April 2009. The government didn't want the economy to sink in line with what was happening in the rest of the world. And to save the economy, the response of the government is something that has resulted in most of the ills that we have in the economy today. So what happened how the government responded, and every single government in the world responded in a similar manner. Fed, ECB, Bank of Japan, everybody cut interest rates to zero. They started printing money, and the government increase their fiscal deficit to boost consumption so that economies don't sink to a level where we were in depression like 1930. So because everybody was fearing this is going to be like end of world post the Lehman crisis, unfortunately we had the elections and government didn't want the situation. The response of the government was NREGA, 30-40,000 crores. We had a farm loan waiver. Incidentally, we had the sixth pay commission. The salaries of the government employees went up in a big manner. We had the minimum support prices of most of the agri commodities that went up. The monetary easing was massive. The overnight interest rate was 9% in July 2009. That was cut to 3/4 in December 2009. So we had a massive monetary easing. CRR got cut. Because of all this, and every single government in the world did this. The difference in case of India, so China did something very similar. They also printed money. They increased their money supply by almost 1/3 in one single year. The difference in case of India was we didn't focus at all on the supply. On one side, if you are printing more money, why I put the NREGA differently compared to some of the other things, because that distorted the labor market of India. If you are suddenly throwing so much of money in a particular section of the society, creating a demand, on another side, simple economics, on another side, you are not focusing on increasing the supply, then what will happen in a typical macro situation? You will have a situation where there is high inflation because there is more demand. People who are not consuming any dairy product, people who are not consuming any kind of, let's say, particularly in the last 5 years, where has been the biggest inflation? The fruits, vegetables, dairy products, meat, eggs. Because the way the demand of those products have gone up, we have not been able to come out with the supply response. So the way government reacted in the last 5 years, that power projects that were supposed to come up in 2008 are yet to see the light of the day. So we didn't produce enough power, we didn't produce enough number of new roads or the new infrastructure, or created another green revolution or another white revolution. Because you're creating demand, you're not creating the supply on the other side. And that's why we had the high inflation. In an economy where the growth has fallen so much, logically inflation should have fallen because people have less money to spend today, but our inflation is running at a multi-year high. Consumer inflation at 11%. In an economy which is slowing down, how can that be? Because you are not creating the enough supply. Fruit, vegetable prices in an economy like this goes up by 50% in a year is something very, very unheard of. Because if you have high inflation, then RBI will have to increase interest rates. Like it or not, they have to increase interest rates because they have to bring down inflation. If you have high demand, you are not producing enough, then what will you do? You will import that from somebody else. And that's why I keep saying this. Your Holi ki Pichkari, your Diwali ke Ganesh ji, your Raksha Bandhan ki Rakhi. Even these kind of things we started importing from China because we made ourselves uncompetitive. And that's why we had the higher current account deficit. If you have higher current account deficit, you are importing more, exporting less, you will have a weaker rupee because you need more dollars to pay for those goods. Because the government was printing so much of money, doling out this cash, the economy has slowed down, tax revenues have gone down, obviously you will have high fiscal deficit. If you have high fiscal deficit, government is borrowing more money, leaving less money with the banks to lend to the other people, so you have tight liquidity. And we kept negative real interest rates. So consumer inflation is at 10%, and your interest rates are 7, 8, 9%. That's why the deposit growth in India is at a multi-year low, is at a 10, 15-year low. Deposits are growing at 13, 14%. Historically, they have grown at much higher rate because people are incentivized to consume and not to save because the real rates are negative. So if you have negative real interest rates, savings go down, and India's saving rate has gone down substantially in the last 3 years. Our peak savings rate was some 36, 37%, has gone down to 30% already. And when the corporate sector faces all these problems, high inflation, high labor cost, high input cost, their profitability has gone down, lots of projects are not coming up, then what will happen? They will cancel their investment plans, and that's why the whole investment cycle has completely collapsed. At a time when, let's say, Unilever or Diageo wants to come to India, most of the Indian corporates are so tired of the government that I keep saying they are on a quit India movement. They will rather think that I'll rather go to a Venezuela or Zimbabwe and do business there instead of doing business there. And that's why the overall investment cycle has come down. And then, of course, these are the things in the chart that I talked about next. But macro is self-correcting, just like nature. Lots of these things are self-correcting. I mean, either by the direct intervention or without the intervention. And I keep saying this about the politicians, that they never do anything out of conviction, but don't fail in delivering out of compulsion. And particularly for democracies like us, you really need a crisis for the government to react, because otherwise a bureaucrat or a politician has no incentive to take any kind of risk. I mean, they are not the entrepreneur. That's why, I mean, the entrepreneurial thinking and a bureaucratic or a politician thinking is very, very different. It's like 360-degree different. They only take risk when, I mean, the push comes to shove. And that's why historically, and not only in India, true of most of the democracies, the biggest reforms only happen when, I mean, you are in a, for lack of a better word, when you are in real deep shit. And that's why, whether it's 91, when the big liberalization or the opening up of economy happened, or whether any kind of reforms. In fact, 97, 98, when Asian crisis was there, we had one of the worst government in terms of the coalition, but we had great reforms because there was Asian crisis, and the government of the day had to take those tough decisions. Even in this political environment, last 13 or 14 months, the government has been increasing diesel prices. They know it's unpopular, but you have to do it. Because there is compulsion, they are doing it. If they had conviction, they would have done that in last 9 years. So because of this, and S&P did a great favor to this country by threatening that if you don't get your house in order, we are going to downgrade you. We are going to put India into junk rating. And because of that, the government took right kind of steps. Despite this being an election year, the government is tightening belt. Government is cutting down on expenditure, which is very unheard of in the Indian history. In last 30, 40 years, before every single election, the government actually goes on a spending binge. We saw that in 2008 when the loan waiver, farm loan waiver, and NREG and so many things got announced. People had the fear something similar would get done. Nothing has got done. Government is actually cutting down on expenditure because S&P is sitting on your head that if you do this, then we are going to downgrade you. And if they downgrade, then rupee goes to 70 and then things go for a toss. They can't do that. The destiny is helping. In all my offshore road shows, I always get questions on India versus China, and I reply in only 2 sentences. China grows because of its government, and we grow despite our government. That's become a cliche. Everybody knows that. But there's another one that you may not have heard of. Some of you might have heard of, that they have the best leadership in the world. They are determined to grow. I think this is the best leadership in the world. They are all technocrats. They are hard, and they are like born to grow. Their entire thinking is how do we grow at 10% or 12% till eternity. They are like determined to grow. But in case of India, we are destined to grow. So you always get some destiny's help. So because China is in trouble, and that's why the commodity prices are lower, and that's why a lot of our problems get sorted out. Because of weak rupee, people think that the rupee has weakened, and you know, lots of those jokes. There is this new term called, it got rupeed, means something that falls very sharply. That he got rupeed. And then you needed R. Rajkumar, like the Raghuram Rajan, to really save rupee from getting rupeed. But a weak rupee is going to help India quite a bit in terms of boosting our export competitiveness. If you have a rupee cost structure and you have a dollar revenue, and if you have the ability to price it, then it's a big boost for Indian business. And now I personally hope that inflation can fall very sharply. So most of these problems that we talked about are yesterday's issues. I think the fiscal deficit the government has taken care of. Current account has already started coming off because exports are improving, and I don't think we have the ability to import more. So most of these are yesterday's issues. Just 1 or 2 slides on the rupee, because next. I don't know if you have noticed, if you read the Economist magazine, they published this Big Mac index. How many of you have seen that? Which is like the price of the Big Mac, the McDonald's Big Mac in every single country. And this is kind of an index, whether on that basis your currency is undervalued or overvalued. Of course, it doesn't work in a very short period, which is like 2, 3, 5 years, but over a longer period. It is one of the indicator whether how much your currency is overvalued or undervalued. As per that, Indian rupee is one of the most undervalued currency in the world. But even more scientifically, I mean the real effective exchange rate, which compares our inflation adjusted currency's value compared to others, rupee was hugely overvalued. Rupee is now in undervalued territory. So hopefully should get stabilized between the 60 and the 65. And another interesting thing is I talked about the China, that all our Hulika, Pichkari, Ganeshji, Lakshmiji all comes from China because we made ourselves uncompetitive. In 2007, 5.25 rupees was equivalent of 1 Chinese yuan. Today it's 11 rupees. One Chinese yuan is equivalent of 11 rupees. So obviously we've got a far more competitiveness. I mean, from anecdotal evidence, Pantaloon told me that they used to import 5 containers a month. They are down to 1 container a month from China because lots of domestic producers have become very competitive. Won't go into much, but all I can say is that the number of steps that have been taken in last 1 or 2 years, particularly because of this crisis, is more reforms than what has happened in the last 10 years. So we grew at 9% between 2004 and 2003 to 2008, but actually government didn't do any reforms, and then I think the growth rate slowed down. But in last 1 year, number of steps have taken place. Another thing, there's always misconception about what are the reforms that are needed in India. I've been through my earlier organization in Birla and then Morgan. We used to send lots of those memorandums through the FICCI CII in terms of what does India need. So before that FM meeting, and if I keep telling my colleagues that if I have the same word file of 97, 98 in terms of the wish list, I think the laundry list would have been very, very similar today. We haven't moved much in terms of the labor reforms or the land reforms and whatever. But there's a lot that has happened, particularly in last 1 or 2 years, and people underestimate in terms of the long-term impact of the reforms that have happened in last 1 or 2 years. It may sound really funny because everybody thinks that there is complete policy paralysis and nothing is happening in this country, but some of these reforms are very, very far-reaching. So a pension bill, because we don't have long-term savings in India, the new companies bill will change the way corporates are governed in India, the way minority shareholders are treated, the way corporate management has to be a lot more responsive to all kinds of stakeholders, a compulsory CSR. There are so many things in the new companies law, or so many other things that have been happening. And I'll come to that. Which are the 2 biggest reforms that you think have happened in last 10 years in India? 2 biggest reforms in India, which will have far-reaching implications, which are already having some implications and will have more implications. Subsidy cut. What else? Of course, that is one of them. What else? FDI. What else? RTI. What else? Right to education. Yeah, that's a big one. Sorry? Narega? No, not really. What else? Aadhaar card, yeah, that's interesting. So Narega, I'll only say one word. So the difference between the NDA ideology and the UPI ideology is, Narega is you are spending 30,000 crore rupees, giving money to people, hard cash, without creating any asset. If you put up one project, if you think that I need to create another 200 airports in India, airports don't cost much actually. To create a small airport in a place like, let's say, if you have to promote, what is that hill station, your Lonavala, Mahabaleshwar and all, those places that I'm going to have another 100 airports in India will cost less than 1 lakh crore rupees. If you spend 1 lakh crore rupees, 40,000 crore rupees will go to labor. Government can give the subsidy of 40,000 crores to the people who are putting up these airports. Money will reach the labor, but you'll create an asset which will create an economic growth for next generation, for next 50, 100 years. This is what Vajpayee did with the roads, with the power, with the airports, with the ports. And the whole difference in terms of ideology in last 5 years is that just keep doling out cash, that's not the way. This country needs very, 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 very different thing. That's why Narega is not. But the 2 biggest, and Rajan, I'll just put one word, that he has written a small paper, 100 small things, you can just do Google. Even if he implements 10 of them, as now he is in the position to do that, I think the financial sector will be very different in this country. Actually I've removed the slide. So to me, the 2 biggest reforms that have happened is RTI and the UID. UID will have far-reaching implications in terms of the way subsidies get spent and lots of other things that can happen in terms of the business opportunities. Nilekani says that I can't even visualize today what kind of business opportunities that will arise from those cards. And the RTI, I think all of us think that corruption has gone up. It's only that our ability to check corruption has really gone up. You just write a 10 rupee letter and you get the information from any government department. It's not that journalists are working hard today. It's just that your ability. It's an active media, active judiciary, and the help of RTI, which is really making our public life extremely, I would say, this is going to be a lot more transparent going forward. And I think I keep saying that maybe after 10 years, it would be the US and Europe where elections will be fought on the issue of corruption, but I think India is going to emerge as a more and more transparent public life society. RTI is changing the way. Somebody wrote a letter to the President's office when Pratibha Patil was there, how much she is spending on a new house post-retirement. It was 130 crores, she immediately stopped the construction. Somebody wrote a letter to Planning Commission, how much you have spent on that Jazzy washroom. They said 35 lakh rupees. After that, government has issued, notifications to people that please be careful when you are spending money on building washrooms. So I mean, it's really changing the society in a very big way. The last points are, I talked about the macro, I talked about the, can you just go previous slide? Previous one. Yeah, the last thing about the politics, because I mean, apart from the macro, and what's more important always is the politics, particularly in our case in India, because that kind of drives everything. I'll just mention one or two points that in last 25 years we have had a coalition politics. Even in 2001 to 2006 during Vajpayee's time, or 91 to 96 when Narasimha Rao was there, we had big bang reforms, but we had the coalition. So I think that's not the, even if there's another coalition government, I think the reforms will continue. And the history of India is that we have done best when there was a crisis. So 97, I mentioned about 97, 98, Chidambaram presented, which is still known as a dream budget, when you had prime ministers like I.K. Gujral and Deve Gowda, I would say, I mean, very weak prime minister and a very weak coalition of third front supported by BJP and the left parties, extreme left, extreme right, and then the, the left of the center, and then all kinds of parties, but I think we managed it very well because there was crisis. So I think the overall direction of reforms is very positive. It's just that the pace goes up or down, but otherwise in last 25 years we have shown that whosoever is in power, I think the market forces ensure that they have to take the right decision. Even if you don't do it for 2 or 3 years, I think the market forces will correct it. So if they didn't do it, rupee appreciated, and then we had all the problems of current account and all that. When rupee depreciated to 68, the government immediately started taking actions. Next. Last point, that as I mentioned, that India is really evolving well. There's a big political transformation. This is of orbital change which is happening in this country. We are moving from what I call caste politics to class politics. I think it's the middle class which is becoming the biggest vote bank compared to the different kinds of caste votes. So the era of that you need to take care of a certain community or a certain, the section of the society is over. I think you need to take care of a large middle class, which is quite good for the country. If you look at the state elections of last 10 years, I mean the Nitish Kumar, Raman Singh, or this guy, in the Madhya Pradesh, the Shivraj Singh Chauhan, Narendra Modi, they get elected third time. And if you don't deliver, despite this anti-Congress wave, this guy Yediyurappa lost the BJP lost in Karnataka. People only want two things, growth and governance, nothing else. There's no other agenda, there is no other slogan that works. I think most of the state chief ministers that I meet, they get this signal very clearly. We have to deliver growth and governance. Ashok Gehlot doled out money like nobody's business in Rajasthan, anybody who has any connection with the Rajasthan, and he got completely, the Congress got routed in Rajasthan. The message to the political class is very clear. Deliver growth and governance. People want well-paying jobs. People don't want more dole-outs. The third thing, I think, as I mentioned, that for 5% growth in India, you need 28 good chief ministers. If you have a better center, I think you'll get 8% growth. But for, the Bihar, Odisha, those states are growing at 10%. At $800 per capita, they will continue to grow at 8-10. They will still be the poorest of the poor. So who will bring down the overall average below 5? Then the states like the Gujarat and the Maharashtra and Delhi have to grow at 2 or 3%. Can that happen? Highly unlikely. I think a 5% growth is kind of assured by these 28 guys. For 7 or 8%, you need a strong center, which hopefully we'll get. And the power of institutions, I think India has got one of the best institutions in the world. Some of the institutions like Election Commission, the way we conduct our elections, the way judiciary is evolving, I think there are Reserve Bank, SEBI, some of these institutions are just world class. And just 1 minute on the health of corporate India. As I mentioned, that because the way input cost went up, the wages were going up, the way interest cost was going up, the whole policy paralysis, people expanded in 2006, 7 and 8, extrapolating the 9% growth and thinking that money would be easily available, whether from the banking system or from the stock market. Our markets were thriving that time, and then the investors were willing to put money in any kind of company, whether through equity or the debt. But suddenly you had the Lehman crisis in 2008, and then you had a major policy paralysis in the country. So you got a huge, what I call the work in progress for most of the corporate India. So you wanted to put up you are producing 1,000 megawatt, and you plan to put another 3,000 megawatt, considering that the country is going to grow at 9%. But then again, you didn't get the coal linkage, you didn't get the evacuation, the transformation, the transformers haven't come up, or you didn't get another license, you didn't get the forest license, you didn't get the environmental clearance, and you didn't get different kinds of state clearances. And corporates have got a massive amount of those projects that have got stalled. People took lots of dollar loans thinking that the currency is going to appreciate at 40 and 42, and then you had the massive depreciation in the currency. So they got hit from all sides, but I think the worst is clearly behind them. Next. And I think now that the overall wages growth in India has really come down significantly, may not be great news for several of us here. Today you can hire a fresh, it may not sound good, but a fresh engineer or a fresh chartered accountant at almost the same salary that you were paying in 2008. So in real terms, salaries have really declined in last 5 years. I mean, an ICICI bank can hire a chartered accountant or a fresh MBA at almost very similar salary what they were paying in 2008 when the talent was in short supply, and today there is an excess supply. And that's why the labor cost is going down. The interest cost, of course, has gone up, but I believe another a year or so interest cost will come down. Globally, commodity prices are soft, so your input cost has gone down. Rentals have fallen 50% across the country. So I mean, wherever we were paying 300 rupees per whatever square feet, now we are paying 150 square feet. So the cost structure has come off. Your rupee has depreciated, so if you have any kind of dollar revenue, then your revenues have gone up. I think overall margins are going to improve. And when a lot of these capacities which have not been working due to the slowing economy, as economy improves, then overall there could be a boost in your bottom line. So your top line goes up because the economy does well, your capacities come on stream, margins go up for the reasons that I mentioned, then your bottom line can go up very, very significantly. And last point, I won't take too much time on the markets that visually, I don't know how many of you would be interested that we are at 21,000, 5 years back we were at 21,000, but I think in terms of valuations which are substantially lower compared to where we were in terms of price to earnings or price to book. Also another question that, in last 5 years, foreign institutional investors have invested $80 billion in our country, more than 4 lakh crore rupees. While most of the Indian investors have been selling equity. For last 5 years, I've been getting redemptions almost like most of the months in last 5 years. Indian investors have left no faith on the Indian economy. Why is that? Such a big divergence of views between the foreign investors and the Indian investors. They just love us. I mean, despite all the negative news related to politics, related to banking sector, related to the falling profitability, related to everything, the poor macro, depreciating currency, everything, the S&P's threat, foreign investors continue to pour more and more money. And the reason is that relative to rest of we think we are doing bad, but relative to rest of the world, we are doing quite well. Relative to most of the other countries, particularly let's say in the emerging market space, where China has got its own set of problems. If China is not doing well, then most of the economies that are based on high commodity exports to China, so let's say Brazil, Russia, South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, they all go out of the radar from the investors. Then India really, because we have a very diverse set of companies, I mean, so unlike let's say if you go to Brazil below below Petronas and all, there are very limited opportunities. So you have to be you have to have a positive view on commodities. If you go to Russia, then Gazprom, Rusal, some of those companies, and there is nothing in that market. So most of the markets don't offer the kind of opportunities that our markets offer. Despite all the macro problems in last 5 years, let's say Sun Pharma or an Infosys or a TCS or an HDFC Bank, or there are so many companies, particularly in consumer, pharma, IT, some of these space have done exceedingly well. They've been growing well. Their ROEs are intact. And that's why we continue to get foreign investors who look at this micro story, not the macro problems that we have, and they know that even the macro, compared to the rest of the world, which has got structural problems. In case of India, the problems are more cyclical in nature. The structural story is very much intact. The long-term 10, 20, 50, 100-year story is very much intact. We are going through a cyclical problems, but the structural is very strong. While the rest of the world has got large structural problems to take care of. They don't have the cyclical challenges that we have. Next. The last, before I conclude, one more point. Where is the money? Next. The other thing, as I mentioned, that compared to Indian corporates, the foreign investors have, apart from the foreign institutional investors, even the companies have a far better view on the long-term potential of India. So Unilever put $5 billion on the table to increase its stake by 20%. They are not getting a single new board seat, they are not getting a new brand, they are not getting a new franchise. This is a pure financial investment. The board would have looked at 100 other countries and they would have decided that this is one place where I'm going to make more money even at the P/E ratio of 35. And that's the case with most of the other corporates. One more point I would like to make, I write every year a person of the year, and this year my person of the year is the Indo-Japan relationship. I think for next 50 or 100 years, this relationship will define the future of Asia. Japan is going to be one of the largest investors in India because of the I would say the political issues between the China and Japan. They will find India very big strategic partner. Their emperor was here after 60 years. Prime Minister Abe was here in last 10 or 20 years. I don't know any Republican day. Normally the chief guest is from a country whose name you wouldn't have heard of. It's very rarely that you get a prime minister of a country like Japan on Republican Day. Manmohan Singh was there a few months back. He extended his official trip by 1 day. And normally these trips by prime minister, this is not yaar mama kya gaya, mami ne bola ek din aur ruk jao. So this is something he would have stayed for something very, very important. I mean, these have to be read between the lines. I think the DMI, so the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor, the Delhi-Mumbai Freight Corridor is going to the poster boy of what's going to happen in India's infrastructure next. And that is going to get replicated in several places. The work is going on. It'll just take maybe a couple of months with the new government. And I think that can change India's infrastructure in a very big way. Japan has got a lot of money to invest. They've got the technology. What we need is money and technology, the ability to execute and cheaper money, which we don't have. I think Japan can provide that. And what we can provide is a counterbalance to China because they have a big strategic military conflict with China. I think we are a natural partner to Japan. And I think this can define the economic and the, I would say, the strategic history of Asia for next 50 years. Next, just leave a couple of slides. The last two slides. And then one more thing, I think the Economist cover page is generally a good contra-indicator. Just like a month before they had this on the cover page, probably that clearly shows that India has really bottomed out. Next, just go to the last one. Yeah, just before that. The world we are in, before that. So I'll just take 2 more minutes, the last 2 minutes that, we always get far too worried about what's happening in the rest of the world and we really don't have the faith in ourselves. We need to believe in ourselves. The problems in the world are really massive and then there could be risk from various sides. There are several things that can go wrong with the world and I can just talk about few things. The global warming, I mean, it can really, the agri prices can really shoot up. We saw that in 2008-9. Again, that can happen. The Abenomics, the experiment that is happening in Japan in terms of cheap money, if that fails, they have a huge public debt. Country can go bankrupt. Sovereign debt crisis in Europe, in US, the developed world has got a lot of debt in its book. The euro can actually break up. Last year, I mean, people had that kind of fear. The potable water, I mean, it's the scarcity of that can really impact us. There is a massive youth unemployment, which is always very scary. It promotes entrepreneurship on one side, but on the other side, if they are not guided properly, if the political leadership is not right, it can go in wrong way, which is happening in some of the Middle East countries which have young population. The aging population is a very big challenge in several countries. People are aging. Arab Spring can happen. If something goes wrong in Saudi Arabia, oil prices can shoot up. There could be a resource crunch. There could be a currency war. I mean, every country wants a weaker currency, but somebody has to kind of anchor. Dollar itself can be weak. Something can go wrong with China. So there's a lot that can go wrong. But I think the future is infinitely more beautiful. There is a lot that can go right. And since the last slide that I think some of these things, and probably you know it far better, I think can change. At no point in time in human history, the mankind has lived so peacefully the way we are living today. At no point in time in human history, in any continent, the way people are living today. There has never been so much of peace in the world. At no point in time in human history, people have been so concerned, so connected, and so cooperative the way they are today. I think the social media and all have really changed. The way innovation can happen, probably, the Bill Gates quote, we always overestimate what can happen in next 1 year, but we always underestimate what can happen in next 10 years. We are really underestimating what can happen in next 10 years. The power of technology, the way technology is reaching to different people, I think all these, I keep telling in my industry when people say that we haven't really touched the surface, the mutual fund is just 2% of the overall, whatever population population and all, I think there could be a giant leap in 3 years' time if one fund invests in technology and then ensure that through the mobile, through the right kind of data analytics, through the right kind of, I would say, technology, I think we can leapfrog. The future of banking, the future of financial services, the future of different kinds of delivery of services can be very different. And whether a drone for delivery or whether a space shuttle for man for travel, some of these things might sound very sci-fi, but actually can become quite a reality. Lots of things probably we are seeing today, but I think we are at that tipping point where I think next 3, 4, 5, 10 years, something can happen very, very big time. At no point in time, we had 3 billion new consumers. I think people who get worried about the growth slowdown, 3 billion new consumers who are joining the consuming class of the world, the billion Africans, the billion Indians, the billion Chinese, and several million Latin Americans. This is going to be a very, very different world. And I think the energy can change very dramatically. I don't think maybe after 10 years, the fossil fuels may not be required only, and that can change the whole, what people call the renaissance in manufacturing can change very, very differently. So I would like to end on that note that I think the future is infinitely beautiful. And for all those entrepreneurs and the budding entrepreneurs here, I think only the Sir Victor Hugo's quote, no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. And I sincerely believe our time has come. Thank you so much.